Welcome back, my fellow assassins, to the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. So, as you saw from the title of this episode, we're talking about VPNs today. Specifically how VPNs lie to you. But I want to preface this by saying that VPNs do have a use case, and I use them on a regular basis, basically a daily basis between work and my own personal usage. And they are a very handy tool when you use it with the correct goals in mind. So I'm assuming most of you have heard of what a VPN is. Whether you know how it works or what it is, that's a different question. But I'm assuming most of you have heard of a VPN. So if whether you've heard it from YouTube videos or TV commercials or what have you, I'm sure most of you have at least heard of what a VPN is. But how a VPN works is what we need to dive into first before we can get into the crux of this episode, which is why and how VPN companies are lying to you. So first things first, what is a VPN? So a VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. So what this allows you to do is allows you to connect to a remote server and routes all your traffic through it. Okay, cool. Now what does that mean in English? So rather than you going through your ISP or your internet service provider for all your internet requests, you instead tell your ISP, hey, I want to go to this address, which is the address of the VPN server. And then from that VPN server, you then go out to do your normal browsing. So let's say, for instance, that you want to go to google.com, for example. What you normally do is you tell your ISP, hey ISP, I want to go to google.com. And your ISP is like, cool, here's google.com. So what a VPN does is rather than you telling your ISP, hey, I want to go to google.com, you say, hey ISP, I want to go to this VPN. And then from there, you tell the VPN that you want to go to google.com, and then google.com will be sent back to the VPN, and then from the VPN will be forwarded on back to you. So from your ISP's perspective, you're only talking to one site. You're only talking to one device. Whether you're going to Google, Apple, Pinterest, Instagram, wherever you're going on the internet, your ISP only sees that you're connecting to this one address or one location on the internet, rather than going all over the place, which is how VPNs try to claim that they provide privacy by your ISP doesn't know the sites you're going to, although there is a caveat to that, which we're going to get into a little bit later. So another thing that VPNs do is they encrypt all your traffic. And what this means is all the traffic that you send to it and it sends to you is basically unreadable to the humans or computers, and only when it gets to you or gets to your VPN provider is it then decrypted so they can you can understand what the website is, or so your VPN provider can understand where you actually want to go. And then the reason why this is generally really good is if you're going to a site that doesn't have encryption built into it, which, for the record, most sites do these days. But if you're going to just a regular website that has HTTP, not HTTPS, or if you don't see the little lock icon in your search bar, then it's not encrypted. So for those sites, they'll be encrypted in flight from your machine and the website. Whereas normally all that data, if it's not using HTTPS, would just be sent in plain text. So anyone could manage to get in between you and the web server would be able to see everything that's going back and forth between you and the web server. So what the encryption does is that blocks the person in the middle from being able to read anything, which is really good for privacy. So another thing that VPNs allow you to do is remotely manage private networks, which in other words is the main reason they were created. So the goal of this is, say that you are working for a company and you're working from home and you need to log into a server and manage it or update it or what have you. Obviously, the company's not gonna, allow that server to be accessed by anyone by the broad internet. So what they have you do is you log in through a VPN. So you connect to a remote server, which happens to be your company's server, and then that allows you access to your company's network remotely. And since everything's encrypted, you don't have to worry about, data being leaked or anything like that, and everything's secure because it's encrypted. So since you're connected remotely, you can then manage the network. So this is personally what I use my VPN for a lot. Between working, I use it to connect to my company's internal networks, and I also use it, for my personal use, so I can connect back to my house and manage, all my computers here remotely. Or if I want to, I have a Pi-hole set up for my DNS queries to block ads. So I can, whenever I'm not home, I can just, connect to my VPN and get my ad blocking wherever I want. And then another thing that is pretty common nowadays for people to use VPNs is to get geo-locked content. And the reason why that you're able to do that is because you're connecting to a remote server. Your IP address is changing, which your IP address is basically just your address on the internet. So if you think, your address in real life is 123 Main Street, that's how, the mail service or the network packets know how to get to you. So you're basically changing your IP address from, 123 Main Street to 875 Cool Avenue or something, So what this allows you to do is most places that do geolock content are able to geolock based on IP addresses. So if you can change, connect to a remote server and change your IP address, you can then change your IP address to be in a different country and allow you access to otherwise locked content. Although it should be noted that certain companies are, catching on that people are doing this and are mass blocking known VPN IP addresses. And the reason they're able to do this is because IP addresses are kind of a premium these days. And you have to buy them up if you want a static IP, which is basically an IP address that never changes. And basically, because these big VPN companies have so many IP addresses that don't change, these companies like, Netflix or whatever are able to identify which IP addresses are the VPNs and just straight up block them. So even if you do try to get past the geo filter by using a VPN, depending on what VPN you use, it's not going to work anyway. So that's one thing to be mindful of too, because that is one selling point that some VPNs try to use, is that you can access geolock content through them. So that's just something to be mindful of. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of how a VPN works, let's go through some of the claims that VPN companies try to make on their websites or in their ads. So one of their big points is that web browsing is unsafe and hackers can view what you're doing. And then another one is they can prevent targeted ads. Another one is your ISP won't know what you're up to. You won't be tracked around the internet. History and online identity will be private. They don't keep any logs. They don't sell your data. And your data will be secure through an encrypted tunnel. So that's a lot of claims, and we're gonna blow some holes through them. So let's start with the first claim there, that browsing the web is unsafe and hackers can view what you're doing. Well, that might have been true back in the 1990s or the early 2000s before encryption was a thing. But as I mentioned earlier in the episode, if you see any website that has HTTPS or has that lock icon in the search bar, it's using encryption. So even if you're on an unsecure network, like an unsecure Wi-Fi with no password, even if someone is snooping all the network traffic, they're still not going to be able to see the data that you're, sending to and from the web server. So even if you are in your online banking app or whatever, they're not going to be able to see anything because everything's encrypted. Sure, they can, see that you're connecting to your bank, but they won't see any of the data that's going back and forth. Now, if you're using a site that isn't secure, that's just using plain old HTTPS, that is just sending, plain text across, then sure, they'll be able to see what you're doing. But if a site is using HTTPS, you shouldn't be sending anything to it, of value anyway, like your credit card information or anything like that. Just, heads up if you didn't know that. This idea that the internet is, unsafe and that hackers are going to, see all of what you're doing is kind of BS, because the vast majority of the internet, like I would say 95%, if not more, is using HTTPS anyway. So the majority of the traffic going around on the internet is encrypted, so they're not going to be able to see what you're doing regardless. So let's go to the next claim, that they can prevent targeted advertisements. So yes and no. If you're changing your IP address, obviously that's going to make it harder for people to give you targeted ads. But in the reality of it is, there's a lot more that companies use these days than your IP address to know who you are and give you targeted ads. And there's some other, some of the other claims that will, dive in deeper to this. But just for this targeted ads purpose with the whole IP address thing, let me give you an example. So say you're going to a costume party, and when you're up in your costume, no one knows who you are because you're disguised, right? And this, just like when you're on the internet and using a VPN, you're not using your real IP address, so you're disguising your real IP address so people won't know who you are. So that's good, right? You're covered, no one's going to know who you are. But then what happens if you, tell everyone at the costume party who you really are? Well, your cover's blown, right? Just like if you're using a VPN because you want to, be protected and private and not get targeted ads. Well, if you go log on to your Gmail account or your Facebook account or your Twitter account or any other account online, you're basically announcing to the world who you are. So the fact that you're trying to cover yourself with where you really are with your IP address, I mean, yeah, cool, you're not at your real IP address, but these companies still know exactly who you are because you literally just told them. So then another claim is that your ISP won't see what you're up to. So as I mentioned before, that this is mostly true, but you do have to watch out for things like DNS leaking, which is essentially your ISP can see which websites you're requesting and get you that way. So a story that I have for this is one of my friend's dads was sailing the high seas, shall we say, and they were using their ISP's DNS settings rather than, a third party's or their own. And their ISP was able to see the sites on the high seas, you could say, that they were searching for, and then subsequently saw large amounts of data being downloaded. So it doesn't take much to, put two and two together, that so-and-so is out here connecting to this one address that, for all their traffic, and they're requesting this site that's on the high seas, and they are downloading large amounts of data. I think it's pretty obvious to see what the person's up to. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, look up the Urban Dictionary definition for sailing the high seas, and you'll figure it out. So let's circle back to that preventing targeted ads with these next 2 points. That you won't be tracked around the internet, and you keep your browsing history and online identity private. So going back to that costume example, sure, you're, quote unquote anonymous while you're in your disguise, aka having a different IP address than your real one. But as soon as you announce yourself to everyone, the whole internet, who you really are by, logging into a personal account or whatever, all that, quote unquote privacy that you had is just thrown out the window. And then another thing that I was kind of alluding to earlier was most websites these days use things like cookies that are already on your computer. And unfortunately, these aren't the tasty kinds of cookies like sugar cookies or Christmas cookies or chocolate chip cookies. These are just, packets of data that the web browser sends between you and the computer to keep track of, either where you are on the website or what you were doing on the website for like sessions and all that kind of thing. But even if you change your IP address, that cookie's still going to be there, so it's not going to do you any good. Another tactic that some companies are kind of more moving to nowadays is fingerprinting your web browser, so they can, figure out who you are regardless of what your IP address is. So what fingerprinting your web browser is every web browser, when you connect to a website, your web browser sends information to that website, so the website knows how to properly display, or what to send to your web browser. So for example, if you're, on a mobile device, like you're on an iPhone or an Android, your mobile browser will send like, hey, I'm a mobile device. And then the website will know, okay, I'll send you the mobile site. Or if you're on a desktop, like Windows or Mac OS, are using Firefox. Firefox will then send, this is Firefox. We're on a desktop. Send me the desktop site, and the website will be like, okay, here you go, here's the desktop site. And this information that the web browser sends is what's called a user agent. Now, depending on what operating system you're using, what web browser you're using, and the screen size you have set on the web browser, you can make these user agents pretty darn unique. So, especially if, you're using some obscure user agent, like say you're on Windows XP, since, no one's really using Windows XP anymore. But say for whatever reason you're a madman and using Windows XP because you want to live on the edge of getting every kind of virus and malware on your computer. So you're using Windows XP, you're using Firefox, a super old version of Firefox. You have the screen size really, really small, and then you're connecting to google.com, let's say. And then you connect to your VPN so you can be private, so you can have your privacy and that Google won't know who you are. Well, Google is going to know exactly who you are, because who in the world is going to be using Windows XP with this old version of Firefox in this super small window size? It's you. They know who you are. So just because you're, changing your IP address doesn't mean that companies won't know exactly who you are, because the user agent that your web browser is sending can be pretty darn unique. Another spooky thing that they like to do is they like to, do pattern recognition and, try to track what kind of things you're browsing for and searching for. So, and then you combine that with your, user agent, and, they got you. So if you have this super specific user agent and, you have a constant history of searching for, cute cat pictures online, and then they see that this super specific user agent is searching for cute cat pictures online, but their IP address is different, they can, identify with a good amount of confidence that that's still you. So changing your IP address isn't going to do a darn thing. And the last thing that I kind of want to touch on this, keeping your browsing history and online identity private, is you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of it all. Because you're essentially saying, okay, who do I trust more with my data and browsing data? Do I trust my ISP, or do I trust this VPN company? Now, you can make arguments for and against both sides. Essentially what it comes down to, are you more trusting of your ISP knowing everywhere you want to go on the internet, or do you trust some random VPN company with everywhere you want to go on the internet? So that's a good segue to the whole logging information. Most of these, VPN companies will say that, oh, we don't keep logs, or we don't sell your data. But just so you all listeners are aware, by law, VPN companies are required to give over any information they have on you, if subpoenaed by a government such as the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, France, Germany, Denmark, and many others. So if the VPN company does keep logs privately without telling you, all that data is going right to the government. Now, in some cases, they might only have information like, yeah, you bought a subscription at this time, or you connected to us during this time, but don't actually, keep a log of everywhere you went while you were using, during your session. But some places do. And yeah, so if when they say they don't keep logs, just be aware that if the government does subpoena them for whatever reason, they're giving basically everything that they have over to the government. So, and the other thing about the whole thing about we don't keep logs is, okay, prove it. Prove it. You cannot prove that these companies aren't keeping logs unless you go to their sites, like, go where their servers are and go through every single file. You have no way of knowing if they're telling the truth. Sure, they can say they don't keep logs, and they might have a track record of, when governments come knocking, they don't really give them anything. But you have no way of knowing that they don't keep logs unless you actually have physical access to their servers and can view every single file, which is never going to happen. The other thing, too, is they might claim that they don't keep logs or sell any of your information to advertisers. But again, you have no way of knowing that. For the record, if the VPN you're using is free, I can almost guarantee you that VPN company is selling your data to advertisers to make money off of you. Now, you might care, you might not. I mean, it's up to you. But just so you're aware, even if the company says that they don't, sell your data, if you have a free account, aside from the fact that your speed's probably a lot worse than if you paid for it, they're probably selling your data so they can make money off you regardless. Now, as far as the people with paid subscriptions, VPN companies selling their data, I'm personally inclined to believe that they don't sell your data if you're subscribed, mainly because they're already making money off of you through your subscription, so there's not really much incentive for them to sell your data to advertisers. I mean, that's not to say that they don't, but my inclination is to believe them in that claim that they don't sell your information to advertisers, assuming that you have a paid subscription. And then another claim that they have is that your data is secure through an encrypted tunnel. So yes, that's true. That's how VPNs work. All your data is encrypted between you and the VPN server. So, that's good. But again, the vast majority of the internet is already using encryption end to end. So you're not necessarily gaining a whole lot, by having that encrypted tunnel. The main use case that you could have for this is if you're, on a public Wi-Fi or a hotel Wi-Fi or something, and you don't want any of your information being, tracked. But again, if you're using HTTPS, which 95%, if not more, of the internet already uses, it's not like, anyone's going to be able to see what you're doing anyway. So VPNs, without a doubt, have their use cases. For example, you can access geolock content, although, like I said, some places are starting to crack down on this, so your mileage may vary. Although I will say, if you make your own VPN, for instance, like if you create an AWS account or a Google Cloud Platform account or a Linode account or whatever, and create your own VPN through there, you won't have any issues with, the whole geolocking thing. But if you go through a bigger VPN company, then you could run into some issues depending on, the company and whatnot. And then another, great use case is connecting remotely back to your home or business when traveling. So for instance, say you have, a home media server or something that you have, all your personal movies on, and you're traveling to, your grandparents' house, or you're traveling, across the country or to a different country or whatever, what have you. What you can do is you can use a VPN to connect back to your home network and stream those movies wherever without having to expose your media server to the broad internet, so it makes it a lot more secure. So VPNs are 100% definitely good things to have. They have their place, they have their use cases. The only issue is that these VPN companies, in my opinion, are trying to prey on the uninformed and use marketing gimmicks and sales tactics to kind of bend the truth to scare those who don't really know exactly how VPNs work into, spending money they don't necessarily need. And that's really the thing. If the reason why you're buying a subscription to a VPN is because you think you're going to be anonymous, you're going to keep yourself private online, just cancel your subscription now, because you're not. Just they don't keep you any more anonymous or any more secure than if you were just going through your ISP. Because as we laid out, companies aren't just using your IP address to track you. That's just a small sliver of the puzzle that they're using. They're fingerprinting your browser. They're using cookies. They're doing data analysis on your search queries, on your search history based on, basically combining the cookies, the user agents, the IP address, everything to combine one massive profile on you. Plus, if you're signing into social networks while using a VPN, your privacy is just gone anyway. So if you're of the belief that when you're using a VPN, you're somehow now anonymous and everything that you do is private, you're fooling yourself, because that's just straight up not true. Like I said in the very beginning of this episode, I think VPNs are great. I use them basically every single day. And they have their purpose, but they are not meant to make you anonymous or keep everything you're doing secure. That's just, marketing gimmicks from companies to get you to buy into their, VPN. So don't take this as me, hating VPNs and you should never use a VPN, because VPNs are definitely good, definitely have their purpose. And if you're using them for the right reasons, they are invaluable tools. But, these companies, they're just trying to twist the truth and, use various marketing gimmicks to get you to try to scare you into thinking that, if you're not using a VPN, you're going to get hacked. Because one thing I will say, and I implore you, if you have a VPN, to do this right now. If you have a VPN, make sure it's on and go to a different VPN provider's website. Since what some of these VPN providers will do, will show your IP address and be like, oh, you're not secure, buy our VPN so you can be secure. But you're connected to a VPN right now, right? So it says you're not secure because you're not connected to their VPN, which, I just think that's funny, because I've personally done that before and I find it hilarious. This company says that you're not secure because you're not using a VPN, even though in reality you are using a VPN, just not their VPN. So yeah, I think that's funny. So if you enjoyed this episode, I'd please ask you to leave a review, give it a rating, and share it to a friend or family member so they can learn about, what these VPN companies are up to, or just so they can learn, more about VPNs in general. And if you have any questions for me, or for a few ideas for any future episodes, feel free to shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com, or leave your question in a rating and a review, and I will try to add it to a future upcoming episode. So that's going to do it for me and this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.